In the last 2 months, animated TV adaptations of both Vampire Survivors and Among Us were announced. These are two of the biggest names in indie gaming these last few years, making those announcements pretty hard to miss. But they are just the latest additions in a growing movement that started several years back, with indie game TV shows becoming the hot new item that every studio wants a piece of. In this video, I'll map out the state of video game adaptations at large, as well as how I believe we ended up in this place, where indie games are being picked up for series orders en masse. Hollywood has a terrible reputation when it comes to adapting video games. I mean, their history with handling adaptations at large can be pretty mixed. These are going to vary from unwatchable to beloved classics. But film adaptations of games are always going to suffer from reduced lengths, loss of immersive storytelling, and big-wig Hollywood stooges who think gamers' favorite part of the Sonic series is James Marsden.
Oh shit, you remember the movie Sonic? Yeah. That's the one with the new one with Jim Carrey, right? Yeah. I heard that was not a good movie.
Looking at recent years, the average quality of video game film adaptations is higher than ever, but they still so often miss the mark. Whether it's yet another instance of changing the source material, adding characters, attaching big names, all to widen the appeal of these movies, it's all so often to their detriment. Somehow, Werewolves Within is potentially now the best video game movie ever made? It wasn't a very high bar to clear, and as a side note, Sam Richardson is hilarious. He deserves to be the lead in more comedies.
Please raise your right hand. Your right hand, sir.
Sorry, I was practicing in the mirror.
But despite all these mid-level receptions at best, several of them did make enough money that the video game adaptation renaissance is now heading our way in full force. Superhero movies are stumbling, and video games have become the next most attainable IP with built-in name recognition. I'm sure most of you know we're getting Five Nights at Freddy's, Minecraft, and Borderlands films. Those IPs are insanely popular names that are certain to draw a crowd. But did you know we're getting a Pac-Man film? Gravity Rush? Space Channel 5? Talking Tom? What even is that? The only one of these upcoming movies I currently have any real faith in is Iron Lung. Since their low-budget approach is honoring the indie origins, the original creator remains involved, and they teamed up with Markiplier, who is someone who's known to be passionate about the source material. But I expect the majority of these adaptations to be turned into blockbuster vehicles for The Rock or some other rising star. They should all take note of what the Mario movie did and just cast Jack Black in every major role. That'll lift all these cash grab stinkers up to billion-dollar super successes. However, on the small screen, we've been getting one banger game adaptation after another. There are obviously still exceptions.
Right. I mostly just read Zootopia porn, so...
But series like Castlevania, Arcane, and The Last of Us have all felt fresh, bold, and exciting for various reasons. They are respecting the original titles and expanding those worlds in meaningful ways. I first made a video on this subject a few years back after seeing announcements for TV adaptations of Cuphead, Knights and Bikes, Little Nightmares, Hyper Light Drifter, Costume Quest, Hello Neighbor, My Friend Pedro, and Disco Elysium in the span of about 1 year. Something really exciting was brewing at that time, and now, in recent weeks, it's grown into a full-force indie game TV movement. Movie studios are buying up the rights to the biggest, most popular games out there, focusing on things they think have major blockbuster potential. And we are getting heaps of big-name adaptations on TV as well. Assassin's Creed, God of War, Diablo, Horizon, Mass Effect, Twisted Metal, Devil May Cry, Fallout, and a bunch more. But so far, The Last of Us seems to be the exception. I predict the majority of these titles are gonna get twisted around and completely removed from the source material, probably just pulling a generic script off the shelf and then slapping an IP on top of it like Halo or Resident Evil, completely missing the mark the way video game films so often do. They just spent big dollars on those IPs, and their logic is to make something that feels safe with broad appeal. But those end results are always alienating to the long-term fans. And if they're not going to show up for your movie, then no one really is. Meanwhile, the rights to attempt something like a My Friend Pedro adaptation probably cost a fraction, and the creators may actually be left alone enough to make something artistic and really special. So as this movement is picking up steam, I thought it would be interesting to outline trends in Hollywood and game development that I think led up to this point, and why we have so many examples of indie game adaptations entering development at once. When trying to trace this emerging craze myself, I think our most likely catalyst lays in film several decades ago. Bear with me here, this may feel completely tangential at first, but I promise I will get from point A to B without dragging it out too much, but definitely still a little. So, how did the state of video game adaptations in Hollywood become so dire? Or, has always been? There's something very particular about taking a 20+ hour interactive experience and cutting it down into a 2-hour movie that they never quite figured out. Putting it that way, it's a rather Herculean task, and it's no wonder they've never really slayed that proverbial Hydra. I maintain that the 1995 Mortal Kombat is still the best feature film adaptation of a video game. Sure, it has its own flaws, and its sequel is among one of the worst movies ever made, let alone one of the worst adaptations, but perhaps that could be a video of its own someday. I feel like I have a lot to say there. Detective Pikachu and Sonic are among two of the best we've ever had. It reminds me of the early 2000s when we got our first glimpse of consistently good superhero films, with Spider-Man, Blade 2, and Batman Begins. Quality films in that genre had previously been so rare, yet suddenly it appeared they had cracked the code. You could bank on those movies being at least good, and often great. That was its own small sprout of success and quality that eventually led to The Dark Knight and Iron Man both coming out in 2008. That was the true tipping point where both producers and audiences were fully on board with the superhero renaissance that we're still enjoying today. With large franchises like Tomb Raider, Monster Hunter, Watch Dogs, Sleeping Dogs, Uncharted, and even Mortal Kombat again being invested in, combined with sequels to Sonic and Pokemon, other reboots and new IPs all in the works, in a few years' time, we may actually see the Dark Knight of video game adaptations for whatever franchise that may be. These adaptations are beginning to attract bigger investors as well as greater talent both in front of and behind the camera. AAA game film adaptations may be on the rise, and is something I expect we'll start to see as studios' primary tentpole blockbusters now that young adult dystopian action films have died down. Disney and WB can continue to rely on superhero films, but basically every other studio is struggling without major franchises to prop themselves up with. In the past, TV would lag behind films and act as a discount at-home experience. There was nothing particularly prestige about that. Over the last decade, more and more high-end talent and passionate creators have moved to television. We had a few gems in the late 90s and early 2000s that got the ball rolling. It only takes a few.
Dude, you have your whole life to sit around and watch premium cable with Zoe.
It's HBO. It's not TV, it's HBO. Have you ever watched Sunday night programming on HBO? It's spectacular.
But as those first instances of mass success are found, it opens a lot of doors. The revolution was televised by Alan Sepinwall, listed shows like Buffy, The Sopranos, The Wire, Lost, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, and others as being groundbreaking or trend-setting in a variety of ways. This sort of high production quality must-watch TV paved the way for more experimental projects with higher risks and big names. This is when we saw things like True Detective, Fargo, Hannibal, and even Game of Thrones. Suddenly TV had seasonal budgets that far outpaced the spending of the average blockbuster film, with franchises now filled with A-listers and top-tier creative teams. Again, comparing this to what we've seen with comic book and superhero adaptations, sure, we had shows like Smallville way back when, but let's not pretend that show wasn't low budget and kinda like other teen dramas. Not that it wasn't still good TV, campy and enjoyable are not mutually exclusive. But it was only with the superhero genre really breaking out on the big screen that we began to see a more concerted investment in TV development. Now there are dozens of superhero shows and counting. In the time since then, allocations have changed, with TV networks growing budgets and streaming services spending money like crazy, ever hungry for new potential adaptations that could become the next Walking Dead or Game of Thrones. And for that reason, I imagine the growth of video game movies and TV shows is going to happen simultaneously. The talent and resources exist in both mediums, and that competitiveness and widening of the field means that everyone is going to be fighting to buy up as many rights as they can, and producing a multitude of those shows to recover that spending. There's no need to limit yourself, might as well put it on both the big and small screen. We'll probably see some strategies similar to the MCU, if not quite as expansive, but starting to build towards that approach of having big blockbuster films, and now these super high-end Disney Plus shows that tie in. It's like the in-development John Wick TV show to go along with the trilogy. We've already seen examples of studios attempting this, with the Dark Tower movie, which bombed, intending to lead into a TV show, but I don't think any of that's happening now. The Kingsman was relatively successful, we're gonna get more movies and a TV show. From a storytelling perspective, miniseries and full show runs could provide anywhere from 6 to 60 hours to tell your full story. There are so many adaptations that simply aren't going to fit into a 2-hour time slot, even if you do turn it into a lengthy trilogy or series. That's why we now have fantastic remakes like the Series of Unfortunate Events and His Dark Materials following failed and restricted movies. I've had to rephrase, add to, and update a lot of the language in this video to meet new releases or updated announcements, but here's one I'm gonna leave intact exactly as I presented it before. All of that is also why I expect we'll see a new Harry Potter adaptation in our lifetime, and it will instead be a TV series. Yeah, that happened like a decade sooner than I thought it would, but I really shouldn't be surprised. The Lord of the Rings had a very set story to tell, and it worked perfectly as a very lengthy trilogy. But even then, in order to fit everything they wanted in, they had to make these record-breakingly long movies that then come with extended editions on top of that. It's no wonder that their efforts to flesh out more of Tolkien's universe are going to be in a TV series. Previously, this sort of prestige content with big names stepping away from the big screen was reserved for miniseries, something that maybe took as long to film as your standard movie, and that wouldn't tie up a star with many years of contractual commitments. A big name wouldn't dare risk their career by taking starring TV roles. Now, that's the sort of gig that everyone wants. I'm sure the first few appearances of these A-list celebrities in TV were incentivized by big paychecks, but now actors see the value in slowly and subtly developing a character in this longer format, and many have come to prefer working in that way. As a viewer, it's incredible. Now, when we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, this emerging trend makes perfect sense. Studios are attempting to adapt works with exceedingly long source materials, a history of failed movie adaptations, an influx of talent in TV, newly opened doors from streaming financiers. It just makes sense that these rights would get bought up with the hope of the next big thing catching on. Taking that a step forward, throw in this presumed lower cost to purchase adaptation rights from an indie studio, and we see the perfect storm of indie game TV adaptations building off of everything else. I imagine big AAA studios have a little more clout to negotiate. They possess more tried and true IPs with market-tested, built-in fan bases. The cost to a studio to acquire those rights comes at a premium. On the other hand, indie studios have these new, creative, experimental IPs with largely unexplored worlds. If someone wants to produce a show based on that, it's mutually beneficial. Studios can acquire those rights for cheaper, and the indie devs are still getting additional income to support their next project. That IP value is then nurtured through this helping hand expanding that world and increasing its exposure. An indie game adaptation isn't going towards gold-plating some studio CEO's Tesla. It's going toward keeping the team employed and fed while they work on their next game. Big studios are businesses driven by capital interests and making money. I don't fault them for it. There's room in the industry for that. But I think indie studios tend to function closer to that old Disney mantra, even if that's no longer how Disney themselves operates. We don't make movies to make money, we make money to make more movies. I'm still interested in the potential behind AAA game adaptations, but those are a different beast entirely. The majority of them are going to be live action and are immediately committing to multiple seasons. Those big names and more widely known IPs help in selling themselves and earning those high budgets. For example, The Last of Us is a live action show being backed by the powerhouse that is HBO. This show will likely have a massive budget, a few recognizable actors, and will be adapting a narrative-heavy story that already has the in-game feel of an interactive movie. Things like The Last of Us, Fallout, Halo, or Resident Evil, all real in-development series by the way, could translate flawlessly to television. Oh, poor, sweet, dumb, optimistic Graham from 3 years ago, thinking that somehow all of those series had real potential. I lament a day where I thought that that was a real possibility. Whether it be retelling those stories, granting a new perspective, or acting as sequels and prequels, these are fully fleshed out stories with intricate worlds, sub-characters, and deep existing lore to pull from. That heavy lifting of world building has already been done, but that also means the sandbox to explore is massive. These series are so promising because they can give us entirely new stories running tangentially to what we know, expanding those worlds and deepening our love for them. While I'm talking about high-budget live-action adaptations of AAA games, can I please plead with someone to make a BioShock 1 prequel miniseries that shows the War of Fontaine and Ryan, the atom-driven chaos, and eventual collapse of Rapture? Why has that not been made yet? I'll write it for you. You can erase every other one of these adaptations if you just give me that one. Not every studio is going to be able to invest in IPs that large or commit enormous budgets to sets, costumes, actors, stunt work, crews, special effects, and more. And while animation is costly in its own way and rather time intensive, there is plenty of space to keep costs down without it automatically looking cheap. Along comes Castlevania, an animated adaptation that has an extremely positive response. Making it available on Netflix, doing an anime-inspired style, and pulling from a recognizable IP like that were all great first steps. This series actually followed a release of what was a reworking of an intended direct-to-video film trilogy. That's really smart because it's kind of the adaptation of an adaptation. Splitting it up into seasons like that without necessarily promising more, that's some really good risk mitigation. And once they completed that story, the show was successful enough that it has now moved into more original stories made specifically for the series. That success quickly caught the attention of many, with adult-oriented Devil May Cry and Diablo animated series quickly being announced as in development. Many of these series span such a broad variety of characters, settings, and times that they can pull from literally anything they choose. We again have that distinct opportunity to blend the new and familiar. With the now growing interest in adult-oriented adaptations and success found in animated formats, it is inevitable that this trajectory would eventually lead to investing in IPs aimed at kids. There are only so many adult-themed shows that you can make. You don't want to oversaturate that market. Our problem there is that most kid-friendly video games are nearly untouchable juggernauts like Mario, Minecraft, or Sonic. Even though it's not a traditionally kid-oriented game, Five Nights at Freddy's is another game that has a massive younger fanbase. I should say these games are for all ages, but they are still specifically made to be kid-friendly, and once you know it, all of these are destined for the big screen. And really, that's the studios going out and saying, we want to make a movie. Maybe there's some bidding going on there, but no one is going to have the money or resources to come to them and say, hey, we want to make Minecraft. Yeah, sure, go ahead, you can make a movie for millions of dollars. Where does that leave the small studios, looking to produce something that is both for kids and all ages, thus widening your potential audience, without the means to invest in the biggest franchises in the gaming market? These creators would be looking to make the next Adventure Time, Gravity Falls, or Steven Universe. They're going to need to keep budgets low enough that it doesn't need to become the most well-received show ever just to break even. What they need are flexible IPs with recognizable characters, iconic styles, and nearly infinite room for the right creative team to tell a charming tale. In the same way that well-fleshed out 60-hour games do a lot of world building to pull from, a 4-hour game leaves a lot of room to expand things. There's now a creative freedom there to make up a lot of it. There's less concern with conflicting with the existing lore. Adapting all sorts of genres of indie game into various television series, targeting all sorts of varying demographics, seems to be the solution that provides an answer to all these questions and checks off all the right boxes. These aren't bankable global sensations, but instead have the potential for a niche appeal that could attract both fans of the games and new viewers alike. And just like that, we're seeing the video game adaptation renaissance, spanning every corner from massive blockbusters to expensive and epic series to smaller animated adventures for all ages. And I'm excited that indie studios are already getting a piece of that pie. As the industry has widened, these studios don't have to be treated like bottom-of-the-barrel scraps. Those intellectual properties are valuable. It almost doesn't matter to me what the plot of Little Nightmares is. This is such an odd world with style out the wazoo. It's being produced by the Russo brothers and a pilot directed by the stop-motion guru who brought us Coraline, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and James and the Giant Peach. This show is going to be weird. In a world filled with wacky, funny animated adventures, I'm interested in seeing something slower, more dreary, and willing to draw on its horror source material, even if it's only in the same smaller ways that those previously mentioned movies included horror elements. Cuphead was a game all about the animation, imitating traditional styles of older TV and movies. If you were to ask me, which indie game do you think would most naturally transition to an animated TV format? That would have been my obvious pick. I just never thought of it. It was a unique, exciting premise for a video game to draw inspiration from that 90s rubber hose animation style. And they recreated it with such love and affection and dedication. While that itself is satisfying to witness already, the idea of that classic style returning to TV is incredibly appealing and weirdly meta. My friend Pedro had one of the most thrilling animated intro sequences already, and crazy surrealist worlds within the game. It's been described as an R-rated dramedy, with John Wick writer and creator Derek Kolstad acting as a writer and producer, working alongside John Wick co-director and Atomic Blonde and Deadpool 2 director David Litch serving as an executive producer. See? Even these indie adaptations are already starting to attract bigger names and talents. I honestly don't even know if this one is meant to be animated or live action. I'm assuming with how over the top the game is, and the fact that we have that amazing animated sequence already, that would make the most sense. That show is going to be so off the walls bananas. Really, I see potential in any of these announced games, but each of them has a little more to prove before I'm totally sold on the concepts of each and every title. Recently, we had the newly announced Kids See Ghosts cartoon where Kanye and Kid Cudi are going to grunt and emote their way through an acid trip based on their joint album Kids See Ghosts. Nothing will ever surprise me again. You could probably make an adaptation of Connect 4 and it's going to be amazing at this point, with the right talent. To recap how we arrived at this place in video game adaptations, studios are making more blockbusters than ever, and video game adaptations have become the hot new trend. There's more talent and resources over on TV than ever. Video games more naturally translate to series over film. Indie games are both cheap and offer lots of creative freedom. We can expect to see dozens of video game movies and shows in the coming years. And I'm predicting that both the biggest risks in style and storytelling as well as overall highest quality works are going to come from these niche game TV adaptations that typically involve the original creators, have giant sandboxes to play in, and aren't being meddled with to the point that they are unrecognizable. And for those reasons, I think indies on TV are the future of video game adaptations. Please let me know which one of these you're most excited for. Here's a little something fun just for the end of the video. How about pitching a few indie games that I would like to see swept up in this trend with their own animated adaptations? I'm specifically focusing on the indie world here. Top of the list would have to be Psychonauts, another Double Fine game. Can you imagine a team of psychic children conducting adventures of espionage and helping within the minds of others? Same as we saw in that original game and what I hope to see in the sequel, there is a limitless potential to theme episodes based on these unique personalities. Every single episode could be such a wild and unique experience. Plus, animated sequences of fighting and acrobatics with these telekinetic powers would just be a blast. How about something like Night in the Woods? A slower-paced exploration of relationships, emotions, and mysteries. We could either have a slow, plodding plot, like Samurai Jack, with a singular protagonist temporarily crossing paths with others and playing out a short story with each, but I think a more interesting structure would be to make episodes more like installments in an anthology series, where each episode pairs us off with a different set of characters. We could then have a few overlaps, so that we feel like we get to know a few specific characters a bit better, see how they interact with different characters and groups, and provide a unique omniscient presence where we have a complete range of information that the characters within would not be fully aware of. There could be a larger story at hand that all these characters are dealing with, and we're getting their unique perspectives, starting to piece it together ourselves and seeing it all come together. I hope I'm describing it well, because in my head it would be so cool. I don't know, I'm kind of losing the plot here. My ideas stopped being very specific. I'm just excited about the possibilities, I suppose. I see endless potential in these adaptations, and I'm very enthusiastic that these indie studios are finding new ways of expanding their IPs and new sources of monetization. There really shouldn't be a stigma with trying to make money. Making money is a good way to keep the lights on and to keep making games. And these shows are going to provide us with expanded worlds to experience and enjoy, and hopefully helps them to fund their next big game project. As an aside to wrap things up, I find it really interesting that all the attention and resources up until now have been given to AAA studios, with this second wave now filtering down to the little guys. I explained earlier why it seems like everyone's getting their share of the pie at the same time. The fact that it took indie games a while to be brought into this fold largely reflects the way resources and opportunities are presented in game development. Success leads to more success. It's very hard to break out, create something new of your own. Just a little something extra to chew on there. What series do you guys think will make for a great movie or TV show? I might as well open it up here to talk about all things video game adaptation related. If you can think of some good indies, please share them, but I'd love to hear from all of you on any potential adaptation. A huge thank you to the channel's patrons. You gotta love them. At least I have to. Regardless if they're paying me to do so, I'd love them anyways. I've stewed on this topic for a while, rewrote the script a few times. I think I finally condensed it and got it to where I wanted. I'm very excited for this future where I can take breaks from playing my games to instead watch these games. It's gonna be wonderful. Thank you all so much. I hope to see you again soon.